My daughter-in-law swore in court that her son was my husband's, confessing to an affair to secure the inheritance. My husband confirmed it, proud of his virility. My son was devastated. I didn't argue. I just raised my finger, and my key witness walked in with an envelope. When the judge saw the DNA test, everything changed. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. I never imagined that at 63 years old, sitting in a sterile conference room surrounded by mahogany furniture and legal documents, I would watch my family tear itself apart with such calculated precision. The words still echo in my mind, even now. Sienna's voice, trembling with what I now know was perfectly rehearsed emotion, as she looked directly at the estate attorney and declared, "I had an affair with Malcolm. The baby is his." My son Wesley went completely white. I watched 32 years of life drain from his face in an instant. His hands, which had been resting confidently on the polished table, began to shake as he stared at his wife of 4 years. The woman he had trusted completely, the mother of what he believed was his 6-month-old son. "Sienna, what are you saying?" Wesley's voice cracked like a teenager's. He looked between his wife and his father, searching desperately for some sign that this was a cruel joke. But Malcolm, my husband of 40 years, didn't look shocked. He didn't look guilty. He looked proud. "Well," Malcolm said, leaning back in his leather chair with a satisfied smirk, "I guess my old equipment still works better than I thought." He actually chuckled. At 68 years old, he was preening like a peacock over supposedly impregnating his daughter-in-law. The estate attorney, Mr. Harrison, cleared his throat uncomfortably. He had known our family for 15 years, had handled Malcolm's father's estate, and now ours. This clearly wasn't the routine inheritance meeting he had expected. "Mrs. Patterson?" he addressed Sienna formally. "Are you stating under oath that your son Jacob is the biological child of Malcolm Patterson, not Wesley Patterson?" Sienna nodded, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue that seemed to produce no actual tears. "I'm so sorry, Wesley. I never meant for it to happen. Your father and I. We grew close when you were working those long hours at the firm. He was there for me when you weren't. I watched this performance with a strange detachment, as if I were watching actors in a play. But this wasn't theater. This was my family, and the stakes were my late father-in-law's $12 million estate." Wesley stood up so abruptly, his chair toppled backward. "Dad, tell me this isn't true. Tell me you didn't." He couldn't even finish the sentence. Malcolm shrugged with infuriating casualness. "Son, these things happen. Your wife is a beautiful woman. You were never around? What did you expect?" The sound Wesley made wasn't quite a sob, and wasn't quite a roar of anger. It was something primal, the sound of a man's world collapsing. He stumbled toward the door, but Sienna's voice stopped him. "Wesley, please. I know this is hard, but we need to think about Jacob's future. If he's Malcolm's son, he has a right to the inheritance." That was when the pieces clicked into place for me. The timing, the calculation, the way Sienna had been pushing for this meeting ever since Jacob was born. She wasn't confessing out of guilt or a sudden attack of conscience. She was making a play for money. Under the terms of my father-in-law's will, his estate would be divided equally among his male descendants. Malcolm, as his son, would receive half. Wesley, as his grandson, would receive the other half. But if Jacob was Malcolm's son instead of Wesley's son, then Jacob would be entitled to a share as well, which would be controlled by his mother until he reached 25. "I think," Mr. Harrison said carefully, "we need to pause this meeting until we can arrange for genetic testing to confirm paternity." "Of course," Sienna said quickly. "I understand completely. I couldn't let this go on any longer. Living with this secret was destroying me." Malcolm nodded approvingly. "Sienna's doing the right thing. The boy deserves to know who his real father is." I had remained silent through this entire exchange, but everyone in the room could feel my presence. Finally, Mr. Harrison turned to me. "Mrs. Patterson, do you have any questions about how we should proceed?" I looked at my husband, who was still basking in his imagined virility. I looked at my daughter-in-law, whose performance deserved an Academy Award. I looked at my son, who was gripping the doorframe like it was the only thing keeping him upright. Then I smiled. It wasn't a warm smile or a reassuring smile. It was the smile of someone who knows exactly what cards they're holding. "I think genetic testing is an excellent idea," I said quietly. "In fact, I insist on it." Sienna's confident expression flickered for just a moment. "Of course, Mother Patterson. I want the truth to come out." "Oh, sweetheart," I said, my voice soft as silk. "So do I. More than you know." The meeting was scheduled to reconvene in 2 weeks, pending the DNA results. As we gathered our things to leave, Wesley approached me in the parking lot. His face was ravaged, his usually perfect hair disheveled from running his hands through it. "Mom," he whispered, "I don't understand how this happened. I trusted her. I trusted him. How could they do this to me?" I reached up and straightened his tie, the same gesture I had made 1,000 times when he was a little boy getting ready for school. "Sometimes, sweetheart, people show us exactly who they are. We just have to be smart enough to see it." Wesley nodded, but I could tell he didn't understand what I meant. Not yet. As I drove home alone, Malcolm having left with Sienna to discuss the situation, I allowed myself a small smile. They thought they were so clever, so calculating. They had no idea that I had been watching, listening, and preparing for this moment for months. The DNA test would indeed reveal the truth, but it wouldn't be the truth they were expecting. 2 weeks felt like a lifetime, but I had waited much longer for justice before. The 2 weeks following that devastating meeting crawled by with excruciating slowness. But those 14 days gave me time to reflect on how we had arrived at this moment, and more importantly, how I had seen it coming long before anyone else. It started 8 months ago, when Sienna was 6 months pregnant. I remember the exact moment my suspicions began. We were having Sunday dinner at Malcolm and my house, as we did every week. Wesley was exhausted from pulling 60-hour weeks at his law firm, trying to make partner. Sienna sat beside him, one hand resting on her rounded belly, playing the perfect pregnant wife. "Wesley, honey, could you get me some more water?" she asked sweetly. "The baby's been so active today." Wesley immediately jumped up, eager to tend to his pregnant wife. While he was in the kitchen, Sienna turned to Malcolm with a smile that was different from the one she had just given Wesley. It was slower, more knowing. "Malcolm, I've been meaning to thank you for that advice about the nursery colors. You have such good taste." Malcolm preened under her attention. "Well, I do know what I like. Wesley's always been too practical, no imagination." I watched this exchange carefully. There was nothing overtly inappropriate about it, but something felt off. The way she looked at him just a beat too long. The way Malcolm's chest puffed out when she complimented him. Over the following weeks, I began to notice a pattern. Sienna would call Malcolm during the day when Wesley was at work. She would ask his opinion on baby names, nursery furniture, even what type of stroller to buy. She made him feel important, valued, like the patriarch making important family decisions. Malcolm ate it up. At 68, he had been feeling increasingly irrelevant. His own law practice had been winding down, and Wesley's career was surpassing his. Suddenly, here was this beautiful young woman treating him like he was still vital, still influential. "Sienna called me today," he would tell me proudly over dinner. "She wants my advice on cribs. Smart girl, knowing who to ask." I started paying closer attention during our family gatherings. Sienna would position herself so that Malcolm had the best view of her. She would laugh just a little too loudly at his jokes. She would find excuses to touch his arm when she spoke to him. But the most telling moment came 6 weeks before Jacob was born. Wesley had to work late on a Saturday, preparing for a big case. Sienna called me, sounding distressed. "Mother Patterson, I'm having some cramping. It's probably nothing, but Wesley's not answering his phone. Could someone drive me to the doctor just to be safe?" "Of course," I offered immediately. But when I arrived at their house, I found Malcolm's car already in the driveway. "Oh," Sienna said when she answered the door. "Malcolm got here first. He's been so worried about me." Malcolm appeared behind her, looking flustered. "Adrian, good, you're here. Sienna was scared, so I came right over." Something about the scene felt staged. Sienna didn't look scared or uncomfortable. She looked satisfied, like everything was going according to plan. At the doctor's office, I watched Malcolm hover over Sienna like an anxious father-to-be. He asked the doctor questions that should have come from Wesley. He held Sienna's hand during the examination, and when the doctor assured us that everything was fine, Malcolm's relief seemed disproportionate. "Thank goodness," he said, squeezing Sienna's hand. "I couldn't bear it if something happened to you or the baby." Sienna looked up at him with wide, grateful eyes. "You're so good to me, Malcolm. I don't know what I'd do without you." I said nothing during the drive home, but my mind was working furiously. This wasn't an affair in any traditional sense. This was manipulation, pure and simple. Sienna was making Malcolm feel like a hero, like a protector, like the most important man in her life. After Jacob was born, the pattern intensified. Sienna would call Malcolm for advice about feeding schedules, sleep routines, baby development. She made him feel like he was the expert, the wise grandfather figure she could rely on. "Malcolm knows so much about babies," she would say in front of Wesley. "He raised such a wonderful son." Wesley, exhausted from sleepless nights and work pressure, was grateful that his father was helping. He had no idea he was being systematically replaced in his wife's attention and affection. The breaking point came 3 weeks ago, during another Sunday dinner. Wesley had fallen asleep on the couch after eating, utterly exhausted. Jacob was napping upstairs. Sienna and Malcolm were in the kitchen, supposedly cleaning up. I went to get something from my purse and heard them talking in low voices. "You've been such a support to me," Sienna was saying. "Wesley tries, but he doesn't understand what I need the way you do." "Well," Malcolm's voice was thick with pride, "I do have more experience, more wisdom. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had met you first," Sienna said with a little laugh. "Before you were married, I mean. You're the kind of man who really knows how to take care of a woman." I stood frozen in the hallway, listening to my husband being seduced by my daughter-in-law's words. She wasn't offering him her body. She was offering him something much more valuable to a man like Malcolm. She was offering him his ego back. "Sienna, you can't say things like that," Malcolm said, but his voice lacked any real conviction. I know. It's just, sometimes I feel so alone in my marriage. Wesley's always working. He doesn't see me the way you do." That was when I understood the full scope of what Sienna was planning. She wasn't trying to have an affair with Malcolm. She was setting up a situation where she could claim they had an affair, where Malcolm would be so invested in the fantasy that he would go along with whatever story she told. The inheritance meeting was still 2 months away at that point. But I knew Sienna was already positioning herself for her big revelation. She was creating a narrative where Malcolm was the attentive, caring man who had been there for her when her husband wasn't, where a romance could have plausibly developed, where a sexual relationship could have occurred. I started documenting everything. Phone records showing the calls between Sienna and Malcolm. Credit card receipts showing Malcolm buying gifts for Sienna and Jacob. Photos from family gatherings showing their body language, their positioning, their interactions. Most importantly, I started paying very close attention to timing. When Sienna claimed to be running errands, where was she really going? When Malcolm said he was at the office, was he actually there? I began to track their movements, their schedules, their opportunities to be alone together. What I discovered was fascinating. For all of Sienna's careful cultivation of Malcolm's feelings, for all of her manipulation and emotional seduction, she had been remarkably careful to avoid any actual impropriety. There were no secret meetings, no unexplained absences, no real opportunities for a physical affair to have occurred. Sienna was too smart for that. She didn't need to actually sleep with Malcolm. She just needed him to believe that their emotional connection was so strong that it could have led to something physical. She needed him to feel like he was her hero, her protector, the father figure she could rely on. And when the time came to claim that he was Jacob's father, Malcolm would be so invested in the fantasy that he would embrace it. He would want to believe that this beautiful young woman had chosen him over his son. He would want to believe that his virility and appeal had overcome propriety and led to passion. The DNA test would prove that Jacob wasn't Malcolm's biological child, of course. But by then, Sienna would have what she really wanted: chaos in the family, questions about the inheritance, and a legal basis to claim that she had been led to believe Malcolm was the father based on their intimate relationship. She could stretch out the legal proceedings for months, maybe years, collecting legal fees and support payments while claiming that she was the innocent victim of a complicated family situation. It was a brilliant plan. Absolutely brilliant. Too bad for Sienna. She had no idea what I had been preparing for during these long months of watching and waiting. The DNA results were due back today, and I had a feeling this afternoon was going to be very educational for everyone involved. The conference room felt different when we reconvened 2 weeks later. The same mahogany table, the same leather chairs, but the atmosphere was charged with an electric tension that made my skin feel tight. Wesley arrived first, looking like he hadn't slept properly in days. His usually immaculate suit was wrinkled, and I could see the dark circles under his eyes even from across the room. My heart ached for my son, but I knew this pain was necessary for what was coming. Malcolm strutted in next, looking remarkably pleased with himself. He had been insufferably smug for the past 2 weeks, making comments about family responsibilities and stepping up when needed. The man actually believed he had fathered a child at 68 years old and was treating it like a personal victory. Sienna was the last to arrive, carrying baby Jacob in his carrier. She looked appropriately nervous, but I caught something else in her expression, a kind of calculated confidence that told me she still believed she was in control of this situation. Mr. Harrison cleared his throat and opened a manila envelope with deliberate care. I have the results of the genetic testing performed on Jacob Patterson. The silence in the room was suffocating. Wesley gripped the arms of his chair so tightly his knuckles went white. Malcolm leaned forward expectantly. Sienna arranged her face into an expression of anxious concern. The test definitively proves, Mr. Harrison continued, that Malcolm Patterson is not the biological father of Jacob Patterson. The words hit the room like a physical blow. Malcolm's confident expression crumpled. What? That's impossible. Run the test again. There must be a mistake. Sienna's face went through a series of rapid changes. Shock, confusion, then something that looked almost like panic. I don't understand. Malcolm, the timing. Wesley's reaction was the most complex. Relief warred with confusion on his face. So Jacob is mine after all? Sienna, what the hell is going on here? But I was watching Sienna carefully, and I saw the exact moment when her panic shifted into calculation. She was already working on her next move. Oh my God, she breathed, pressing a hand to her forehead. I've been so confused. The timing was so close, and I was so emotional during the pregnancy. Malcolm, I was so sure. She turned to Wesley with tears that looked remarkably convincing. Wesley, I'm so sorry. I must have been mistaken about when. There was someone else. Before we were married. The timing must have overlapped more than I thought. My husband was staring at the DNA results like they were written in a foreign language. But Sienna, you said we had a relationship. You said. I know what I said, Sienna interrupted quickly. I was confused, overwhelmed. The pregnancy hormones, the stress. I convinced myself that our friendship had become something more. I'm so sorry, Malcolm. I never meant to hurt anyone. Wesley stood up abruptly. Someone else? Sienna, what someone else? Who were you seeing before we got married? Sienna's mind was clearly racing. She needed to come up with a story that would explain everything without implicating her in any deliberate deception. It was no one important. Someone from college who came back into my life briefly. I ended it before we got serious, Wesley. I chose you. I married you. The beautiful thing about lies is that they tend to multiply. One lie requires another and then another, until the whole structure becomes unstable. I could see Sienna building her house of cards in real time. But if this other man is Jacob's father, Wesley said slowly, then he has rights. He has responsibilities. We need to contact him, get another DNA test. No, Sienna said quickly, then caught herself. That's not necessary. He's out of the picture completely. He doesn't even know about Jacob. I don't want him involved in our lives. Mr. Harrison was taking notes, clearly trying to keep track of the shifting narratives. Mrs. Patterson, If you're stating that another man is Jacob's biological father, that would affect the inheritance distribution. The child would need to be proven to be a legitimate heir to the Patterson family line. I watched Sienna's face as she realized the trap she was walking into. If she admitted that Jacob wasn't Wesley's child either, then Jacob would have no claim to the inheritance at all. But if she claimed Jacob was Wesley's son, then her whole story about the affair and the confusion would fall apart. Actually, I said quietly, speaking for the first time since the meeting began, I think we need a more comprehensive test. Everyone turned to look at me. I had been so silent during this entire drama that they had almost forgotten I was there. What do you mean, Mrs. Patterson? Mr. Harrison asked. I reached into my purse and pulled out a thick folder. I mean that the test you just conducted only tested Jacob's DNA against Malcolm's. But given the confusion that seems to exist about paternity, I think we need a broader analysis. Sienna's eyes narrowed slightly. What kind of broader analysis? I smiled that same calm smile I had worn 2 weeks ago. I took the liberty of arranging for additional testing. Jacob's DNA has been compared against Wesley's as well. Wesley blinked in surprise. Mom, when did you? I collected a sample from Jacob's bottle during last Sunday's dinner, I said matter-of-factly, and I had Wesley's DNA on file from his medical records, with his permission, of course. That was a lie, but a small one. I had actually collected Wesley's DNA from his coffee cup that same Sunday, but they didn't need to know that. Sienna was very still now, like a deer that had just realized it was being hunted. And what did that test show? I opened the folder and pulled out a second set of documents. It showed that Wesley Patterson is indeed the biological father of Jacob Patterson. 99.9% certainty. The silence that followed was absolute. Even baby Jacob seemed to sense the tension and remained unusually quiet in his carrier. Malcolm was the first to speak. So the boy is Wesley's after all. Well, that's good news, right? Wesley was staring at his wife with the expression I had never seen before. It was the look of a man who was finally seeing clearly after months of fog. Sienna, he said slowly, if Jacob is my son, and he's not Dad's son, and you claim there was another man, then you've been lying about something. The timing doesn't work. Sienna's composure was starting to crack. Wesley, I told you, I was confused, emotional. The pregnancy was so stressful. No, Wesley said, his voice getting stronger. You weren't confused. You stood in this room 2 weeks ago and looked me in the eye and told me you had an affair with my father. You destroyed me. You made me question everything about our marriage, about our family. And now you're saying it was all a mistake? I watched my son find his backbone, and I felt a surge of pride. He was finally asking the right questions. The test results prove that Jacob is your biological son, Wesley, I said gently. He always has been. The question now is why Sienna wanted everyone to believe otherwise. Sienna's eyes darted around the room like a trapped animal. I don't know what you're implying, Adrienne, but I was honestly confused about the paternity. I never intended to hurt anyone. Oh, sweetheart, I said, my voice still soft but with an edge that made everyone in the room pay attention. I don't think you were confused at all. I think you knew exactly what you were doing. I reached into my folder again and pulled out another set of documents. You see, I had Jacob's DNA tested against both Malcolm and Wesley 2 months ago. The room erupted. What? Sienna gasped. 2 months ago? Wesley stared at me. Mom, how did you? I've been watching this family very carefully, I said calmly, and I've seen things that concerned me. So I took precautions. Malcolm was shaking his head in confusion. Adrienne, what are you saying? I looked directly at Sienna as I delivered the blow. I'm saying that I've known Jacob was Wesley's son all along, and I've known that you knew it too, Sienna. Your confession 2 weeks ago wasn't born out of confusion or guilt. It was a calculated lie designed to manipulate this family and this inheritance. Sienna's face had gone completely white. That's ridiculous. Why would I do such a thing? I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Oh, darling, I think we all know exactly why you would do such a thing. The question is whether you're going to continue lying about it, or if you're ready to hear what else I've discovered during my investigation. The word investigation hung in the air like a threat. Sienna's breathing had become shallow and rapid. Wesley was staring at me like he had never seen me before. Malcolm looked like he was trying to solve a puzzle that kept changing shape. "What investigation?" Sienna whispered. I opened my folder wider, revealing stack after stack of documents, photographs, and printed materials. "The investigation that's going to show everyone in this room exactly who you really are, Sienna, and exactly what you've been planning all along." The folder in my hands felt heavy with the weight of months of careful observation and documentation. I had spent countless hours gathering this evidence, and now it was time to lay it all on the table. "Before we go any further," I said, maintaining eye contact with Sienna, "I want to make something very clear. Everything I'm about to show you was obtained legally and ethically. Phone records from accounts where I'm listed as an authorized user, credit card statements from joint accounts, photographs taken in public places, security footage from our own property." Mr. Harrison leaned forward, his attorney instincts clearly triggered. "Mrs. Patterson, perhaps we should." "No," I said firmly. "This ends here, today. This family has been manipulated long enough." I pulled out the first document and placed it in the center of the table. "These are phone records for the past 8 months. Sienna, you called Malcolm an average of 12 times per week. The calls started shortly after you found out you were pregnant, and they increased in frequency as your due date approached." Wesley leaned forward to examine the records. 12 times a week? "Sienna, why were you calling Dad so much?" Sienna's voice was barely a whisper. "I was scared about the pregnancy. I needed guidance." "From my husband?" I asked pointedly. "Not from your own mother? Not from your doctor? Not from your friends? Just from Malcolm?" I placed another document on the table. "These are Malcolm's credit card statements. In the past 6 months, he purchased a baby monitor for $300, a changing table for $450, a stroller for $600, clothes, toys, and supplies totaling over $2,000. Malcolm shifted uncomfortably. "I wanted to help with my grandchild." "Your grandchild," I repeated. "Yes, that's interesting, because these purchases were made before Jacob was born, before you had any reason to believe he was anything other than Wesley's son and your grandson. Yet the receipts show these items were delivered directly to Sienna's house, not to yours for storage." Wesley was staring at the receipts. "Dad, you bought all this stuff for Sienna directly? Without talking to me?" "She said you were too busy with work to shop for baby things," Malcolm mumbled. I placed a third set of documents on the table. "These are text messages between Sienna and Malcolm, retrieved from Malcolm's phone. With his permission, of course." That was another small lie, but Malcolm was too stunned to contradict me. I had actually retrieved the messages while he was in the shower one morning, but the content was what mattered now. "June 15th, I read aloud. Sienna to Malcolm. "Wesley's working late again. Sometimes I feel like I'm going through this pregnancy alone. Thank goodness you understand what I'm going through." Malcolm's response, "You're not alone. I'm here for you, whatever you need." Wesley's face was getting redder by the minute. "Sienna, you were complaining about me to my father?" "June 22nd, I continued. Sienna to Malcolm. Had my doctor's appointment today. Wish Wesley could have been there, but work always comes first with him. At least I know you care about the baby and me." Malcolm's response, "Wesley doesn't appreciate what he has. You deserve better." "Stop," Sienna said, her voice shaking. Those messages were taken out of context. "Were they?" I asked, pulling out more papers. "July 5th. Sometimes I wonder what kind of father Wesley will be. He's never around now, and the baby isn't even born yet. You'd make such a better father than him." The silence in the room was deafening. Wesley was staring at his wife like she was a stranger. "July 20th, I continued relentlessly. Sienna to Malcolm. "I had a dream about you last night. We were a family, just you, me, and the baby. It felt so right, so natural. Is that terrible of me to say?" Malcolm's face had gone ashen. "Adrian, we never." "Oh, I know you never had a physical affair," I said. That's the beauty of Sienna's plan. She didn't need to seduce you with her body. She seduced you with your ego. I placed a photograph on the table. It showed Sienna and Malcolm at a baby furniture store, looking very much like an expectant couple shopping together. This was taken on August 3rd, while Wesley was in court. Sienna called you, Malcolm, and told you she was having contractions and needed someone to drive her to the hospital. But instead of going to the hospital, you went shopping for nursery furniture. Wesley grabbed the photograph. You were having contractions and you went shopping? They turned out to be Braxton Hicks, Sienna said weakly. False labor. We were already out. So Malcolm thought. So Malcolm thought he would play house with his son's pregnant wife. I finished. How romantic. I pulled out another set of documents. These are security camera recordings from our house. Sienna, you visited our home 14 times in the past 4 months when Wesley was at work and I was at my book club or running errands. You made sure to time your visits for when you would be alone with Malcolm. Mr. Harrison was taking notes furiously. Mrs. Patterson, are you alleging that? I'm alleging that my daughter-in-law spent months systematically manipulating my husband, making him feel important and desired, building up his ego, and creating an emotional dependency. She made him believe that he was the strong, wise patriarch that she needed, and Wesley couldn't be. I turned to Malcolm, and for the first time, my voice softened with something that might have been pity. She played you, Malcolm. She identified your weaknesses, your need to feel relevant, your competitiveness with Wesley, your fear of getting older, and she used them against you. Malcolm was shaking his head slowly, but she said, She made me feel. She made you feel like a man who was still powerful enough to steal his son's wife? I said bluntly. She fed your ego until you were so invested in the fantasy that when she claimed you were Jacob's father, you wanted to believe it. You wanted to believe that you had won. Wesley stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. Sienna, is this true? Were you manipulating my father this whole time? Sienna was crying now, but I could see the calculation behind her tears. Wesley, you have to understand. I was scared, pregnant, and alone. You were working all the time. Your father was kind to me. Yes, maybe I relied on him too much, but I never intended. You never intended to claim he was Jacob's father? I interrupted. You never intended to throw this family into chaos right before the inheritance meeting? You never intended to position yourself to claim a portion of a $12 million estate? That's not. I wasn't. Sienna's voice trailed off as she realized she had been caught. I pulled out the final document from my folder. This is a consultation record from the law firm of Davis, Martinez and Associates, a family law firm that specializes in inheritance disputes. You met with them 3 weeks before Jacob was born, Sienna. What were you consulting about? The color drained completely from Sienna's face. How did you... I have friends in many places, I said simply, including former colleagues of your consultation attorney. You inquired about the legal rights of mothers in paternity disputes involving large estates. You specifically asked about scenarios where the biological father might be different from the presumed father, and how that would affect inheritance claims. Wesley sank back into his chair like a deflated balloon. You planned this. You planned all of this before Jacob was even born. The consultation notes indicate, I continued, that you were advised that even a false paternity claim could tie up an estate in legal proceedings for years, during which time the mother would be entitled to support payments and legal fees. And if the claim were eventually disproven, you could argue that you had been misled by circumstantial evidence and emotional manipulation. Mr. Harrison set down his pen and looked directly at Sienna. Mrs. Patterson, these are very serious allegations. If true, they suggest a deliberate attempt to defraud the estate. Sienna was sobbing openly now, but I could see her mind still working, still trying to find a way out. I loved Wesley, she said desperately. I do love Wesley. I never wanted to hurt him. The baby deserves security. I wanted to make sure Jacob would be taken care of. By destroying his father, I asked. By tearing apart his family? By lying about his paternity? Wesley's voice was hoarse when he finally spoke. Sienna, Jacob is my son. He was always going to inherit. He was always going to be taken care of. What more did you want? The question hung in the air, and in that moment, I saw Sienna realize that her game was over. She had been caught in a web of lies so complex that there was no way to untangle them without admitting to the manipulation and fraud. But I wasn't finished yet. There was one more revelation that would complete the picture. One more piece of evidence that would ensure this family was never manipulated like this again. There's something else, I said quietly. Something that will explain why Sienna was so confident this plan would work. The room was so quiet I could hear the ticking of Mr. Harrison's wall clock. Everyone was staring at me, waiting for this final revelation that would complete the devastating picture I had been painting. I reached into my folder one last time and pulled out a manila envelope that was thicker than all the others. The weight of it in my hands represented months of careful investigation, phone calls to old contacts, and pieces of a puzzle that had taken me far too long to assemble. Before I show you this, I said, looking directly at Sienna, I want you to know that I gave you every opportunity to tell the truth. Even now, you could stop this by being honest about what you've done and why. Sienna's tears had stopped flowing, and her face had taken on a hard, defiant expression. I don't know what you think you found, Adrienne, but I found Jennifer Morrison, I said quietly. The name hit Sienna like a physical blow. She went completely white and gripped the edge of the table so hard her knuckles stood out in sharp relief. Wesley frowned. Who's Jennifer Morrison? I opened the envelope and pulled out a photograph of a woman who looked remarkably similar to Sienna. Same blonde hair, same delicate features, same build. She was standing next to an older man in an expensive suit, both of them smiling at the camera. Jennifer Morrison was Sienna's college roommate, I said. She's also the woman who married a wealthy 70-year-old widower named Robert Morrison when she was 26 years old. 1 year after they married, Mr. Morrison died of a heart attack, leaving Jennifer his entire estate worth approximately $8 million. Malcolm leaned forward to examine the photograph. I don't understand. What does this have to do with Jennifer Morrison died in a car accident 18 months ago, I continued. But before she died, she had been corresponding with Sienna. Email correspondence, to be specific. I placed a stack of printed emails on the table. These emails detailed Jennifer's strategy for securing her husband's fortune, how she identified his psychological vulnerabilities, how she made him feel young and vital again, how she isolated him from his family members who might have questioned their relationship. Wesley's voice was barely above a whisper. Sienna, what is this? Most importantly, I said, ignoring his question, Jennifer's emails include very specific advice about inheritance law and how to position oneself to claim portions of an estate even when the legal relationships are complicated. I pulled out one email and read it aloud. From Jennifer Morrison to Sienna Patterson, dated 6 months ago. The key is to create a situation where multiple parties have potential claims to the inheritance. This creates confusion and legal delays, during which you can negotiate for a settlement rather than risk losing everything in court. Remember, you don't need to win the case. You just need to make the case expensive enough that they'll pay you to go away. The silence in the room was absolutely deafening. Sienna was staring at the emails like they were written in her own blood. Another email, I continued. From the same date, emotional manipulation is more powerful than physical seduction. Make the mark feel like he's saving you, protecting you, choosing you over someone younger and stronger. Men like Robert need to feel like heroes, especially when they're competing with their own sons or younger relatives. Wesley stood up so abruptly his chair toppled over. Sienna, you've been planning this for months? You studied how to manipulate my family? Sienna finally found her voice, but it came out as a croak. Those emails are private. You had no right. I had every right to protect my family, I said firmly. Jennifer Morrison's estate was eventually broken up in lawsuits that lasted 3 years and cost over $2 million in legal fees. Her stepchildren received almost nothing after the lawyers were finished. Is that what you were planning for us? Mr. Harrison was flipping through the emails, his expression growing more serious with each page. Mrs. Patterson, these communications suggest a deliberate conspiracy to defraud the estate. This is criminal behavior. There's more, I said, pulling out another set of documents. After Jennifer died, Sienna accessed her online accounts using passwords Jennifer had shared with her. She downloaded financial records, legal documents, and correspondence that detailed exactly how Jennifer's scheme had worked. I placed bank statements on the table. Sienna opened a new savings account 3 weeks after Jennifer's funeral. She deposited $5,000 from the sale of jewelry that had belonged to Jennifer. Jewelry that Sienna claimed Jennifer had given her as gifts. Wesley was pacing now, running his hands through his hair. "You stole from a dead woman? Sienna, who are you?" "I didn't steal anything," Sienna finally exploded. "Jennifer was my friend. She left me those things because she cared about me, because she wanted me to be able to take care of myself and my family." "By lying and manipulating and destroying other families?" I asked. "Is that what friendship looks like to you?" Sienna's composure completely cracked. "You don't understand what it's like. You've never had to worry about money, never had to wonder if you'll be able to provide for your child. Wesley makes good money now, but what if something happens to him? What if he loses his job? What if he decides he doesn't want to be married anymore? So you decided to create a backup plan," I said, "by manipulating your way into a share of the Patterson family fortune." "I was protecting my son," Sienna screamed. "I was making sure Jacob would never have to worry about anything." Malcolm, who had been silent through most of this revelation, finally spoke. "Sienna, you made me feel like. You made me believe that you cared about me." The pain in his voice was evident, and for the first time, I felt genuinely sorry for my husband. He had been used and manipulated, his ego and insecurities weaponized against his own family. "I do care about you, Malcolm," Sienna said desperately. "Everything I felt was real. I never meant to hurt you." "But you did mean to use him," Wesley said, his voice flat with realization. "You meant to turn him against me. You meant to destroy our relationship so you could step in as the woman who understood him better than his own son did." I pulled out the final document from my envelope. This is a detailed timeline of Sienna's activities over the past 8 months. Every phone call, every visit, every gift, every conversation was carefully planned and executed. She studied Malcolm's schedule, his habits, his weaknesses. She knew exactly when I would be out of the house. She knew exactly what to say to make him feel important and needed. The timeline was color-coded and exhaustively detailed. It showed a pattern of manipulation so systematic and deliberate that it was impossible to argue that any of it had been spontaneous or emotional. "She even practiced," I said, pointing to entries from early in the timeline. "These notes show Sienna rehearsing conversations, planning what she would wear to different meetings, researching topics that would interest Malcolm. She treated the manipulation of our family like a full-time job." Mr. Harrison set down the papers and looked directly at Sienna. "Mrs. Patterson, I have to advise you that this evidence suggests multiple criminal violations: fraud, theft, conspiracy to commit fraud. I strongly recommend that you consult with a criminal defense attorney immediately." Sienna looked around the room desperately, seeking some source of support or sympathy, but Wesley was staring at her like she was a stranger. Malcolm looked devastated and betrayed. I was watching her with cold satisfaction. "This isn't over," Sienna said, her voice taking on a hard edge. "Jacob is still Wesley's son. He still has rights to the inheritance. You can't take that away from him." "You're absolutely right," I said calmly. "Jacob is Wesley's son, and he does have rights to the inheritance, but you don't." I reached into my folder one more time and pulled out a legal document. "This is a petition for emergency custody that Wesley will be filing this afternoon. Given the evidence of your manipulative and potentially criminal behavior, given your willingness to lie about Jacob's parentage for financial gain, and given your systematic attempts to destroy his family relationships, the court will very likely grant Wesley full custody of Jacob." Sienna gasped. "You can't take my baby from me." "We're not taking your baby," Wesley said, his voice steady for the first time in weeks. "We're protecting him from a mother who would use him as a pawn in financial schemes, a mother who would lie about his parentage to strangers, a mother who would destroy his family for money. You'll have supervised visitation rights," I continued, "but Jacob will be raised in a stable environment, free from manipulation and lies. He'll know who his real father is, who his real family is, and he'll be protected from anyone who would try to use him for financial gain. The fight went out of Sienna all at once. She slumped in her chair, the reality of her situation finally sinking in. She had lost everything: her husband, her marriage, her son, and any claim to the family money she had worked so hard to manipulate her way into. "I need to go," she whispered, standing on unsteady legs. "Sienna," Wesley said softly, "for what it's worth, I'm sorry it came to this. I loved you. I thought we were building a life together." She looked at him with an expression that might have been regret, or might have been calculation. With Sienna, it was impossible to tell the difference. "I loved you too," she said, "in my own way." Then she gathered her purse and walked out of the conference room, leaving behind her son, her marriage, and any pretense that she had ever been anything other than a calculating opportunist. As the door closed behind her, the 3 remaining members of the Patterson family sat in stunned silence, trying to process everything that had just been revealed. 3 months later, I was sitting in my garden on a crisp October morning, watching my grandson Jacob crawl across a blanket spread on the grass. At 8 months old, he was beginning to show signs of his father's determined personality, pushing himself up on chubby arms and making serious attempts at forward motion. Wesley was inside making coffee, a ritual we had established during the weeks he and Jacob had been living with me while the divorce proceedings moved forward. My son had changed dramatically since that day in the conference room. The defeated, confused man who had walked in believing his wife had betrayed him with his own father had been replaced by someone stronger, more confident, more aware of his own worth. "How's my boy doing?" Wesley asked, emerging from the house with 2 steaming mugs. "Your son is plotting his escape from this blanket," I said, accepting the coffee gratefully. "I think he's got his eye on those roses." Wesley settled into the chair beside me and watched Jacob's determined efforts with a smile that still held traces of wonder. "I can't believe I almost lost him. I can't believe I almost lost all of this because I was too trusting to see what was happening." "You weren't too trusting," I said firmly. "You were a good husband who believed his wife loved him. That's not a character flaw, Wesley. That's what marriage is supposed to be based on." Malcolm emerged from the house then, looking older than his 68 years, but healthier somehow. The past 3 months had been difficult for him as he grappled with how completely he had been manipulated, but he was working hard to rebuild his relationship with Wesley. "Morning, everyone," he said, settling into the 3rd chair with his own coffee. "Jacob's getting close to crawling." "Too close," Wesley laughed. "I'm going to have to baby-proof the entire house soon." The 3 generations of Patterson men had found a new rhythm in the months since Sienna's departure. Malcolm had moved into the guest house behind my main house, giving him independence while keeping him close to his grandson. Wesley had taken a leave of absence from his firm to focus on being a father and healing from the betrayal he had experienced. Most importantly, the family was talking again, really talking, not the superficial conversations that had characterized our relationships for years before Sienna's manipulations began. "I got a call from Harrison yesterday," Malcolm said carefully. "The divorce is almost finalized. Sienna signed the papers agreeing to the custody arrangement." Wesley nodded. "I know. Her lawyer called me. She's not fighting it anymore." Sienna had spent 2 weeks trying to contest the emergency custody order, but the evidence against her was overwhelming. Her attorney had eventually advised her to accept the supervised visitation arrangement rather than risk losing all parental rights entirely. "What about the criminal charges?" I asked. Malcolm shifted uncomfortably. "She's pleading guilty to the fraud charges related to Jennifer Morrison's estate. The prosecutor says she'll probably get community service and restitution. They don't want to pursue the other charges as long as she stays away from the family." I had mixed feelings about that decision. Part of me wanted Sienna to face the full consequences of her actions, but another part of me was grateful that Jacob would grow up without his mother being in prison. "She wants to see Jacob," Wesley said quietly. "Her lawyer says she's willing to accept supervised visitation once a month if I'll agree to it." Malcolm and I both looked at him, waiting for his decision. "What do you think?" Wesley asked. "Is it better for Jacob to know his mother, even under those circumstances, Or is it better to protect him from her completely? It was a question that had no easy answer. Sienna had proven herself capable of manipulation and lies on a stunning scale, but she was still Jacob's biological mother. I think, I said carefully, that Jacob deserves the right to know where he came from, even if it's complicated. But I also think he deserves protection from anyone who would use him as a pawn in their schemes. Supervised visits seem like a reasonable compromise, Malcolm added. He'll be safe, but he won't grow up wondering about her. Wesley nodded slowly. That's what I was thinking too. And maybe seeing him once a month will remind her of what she lost when she chose money over family. Jacob had given up on escaping the blanket and was now sitting up, examining a colorful toy with the intense concentration that only babies can manage. He was a beautiful child, with Wesley's dark hair and eyes, but a gentleness that I hoped came from a deeper source than genetics. Have you thought about what you want to tell him when he's old enough to ask questions? I asked. Wesley sighed. I want to tell him the truth, age appropriately, that his mother made some bad choices, but that he's loved and wanted and safe, that he has a family that will always protect him. And that family includes a grandmother who apparently has skills as a detective, Malcolm said with a small smile. I laughed. I prefer to think of it as the skills of a woman who's lived long enough to recognize patterns. Sienna wasn't the first person to try to manipulate this family, and she probably won't be the last. But now we know what to watch for. The conversation was interrupted by Jacob discovering that he could make noise by banging his toy against the blanket. The serious baby concentration dissolved into delighted giggles as he repeated the action over and over. He's going to be a musician, Wesley said, grinning at his son's enthusiasm. God help us all, Malcolm muttered. But he was smiling too. As the morning stretched toward noon, I found myself reflecting on the strange journey that had brought us to this point. 6 months ago, we had been a fractured family held together by obligation and manipulated by a woman whose only loyalty was to herself. Now we were something different, smaller in some ways, but stronger and more honest. Wesley had learned that trust needed to be earned, not freely given. Malcolm had learned that ego and insecurity could be used against him if he wasn't careful. And I had learned that sometimes protecting family meant being willing to expose uncomfortable truths, even when those truths were painful. I have something for you, I told Wesley, reaching into the bag beside my chair. I pulled out a small wooden box and handed it to him. This belonged to my grandfather. He left it to me when I was about your age, with instructions to pass it down when I thought the time was right. Wesley opened the box to reveal a simple gold watch, worn smooth by decades of wear. Mom, I can't take this. It's a family heirloom. Exactly, I said. It's time for you to be the keeper of family traditions, Wesley. You're Jacob's father now, the next generation of Patterson men. This watch has been passed down through 4 generations of men who understood what family really means. Wesley's eyes filled with tears as he lifted the watch from its velvet lining. What does family really mean? It means that no matter what happens, no matter who tries to come between us or use us or manipulate us, we stand together. It means we protect each other, especially the most vulnerable among us. It means we tell the truth, even when it's hard. And it means we never ever let anyone convince us that money is more important than love. Malcolm cleared his throat roughly. Your mother's right, son. I lost sight of that for a while, and I'm sorry. I let my ego get in the way of what should have mattered most. Wesley stood up and embraced his father, the watch still clutched in his hand. We all made mistakes, Dad. The important thing is that we learned from them. As father and son held each other, Jacob clapped his hands together in delight, as if he understood that something important was happening. I picked him up and held him close, breathing in that sweet baby scent that reminded me of hope and new beginnings. What do you think, little one? I whispered to him. Ready to grow up in a family that tells the truth? Jacob gurgled and grabbed a handful of my hair, which I took as enthusiastic agreement. Later that evening, after Wesley had put Jacob down for his nap and Malcolm had retired to his guest house, I sat alone in my living room with the family photo albums spread across the coffee table. I was updating them, removing the pictures that included Sienna and organizing the rest to tell the story of our real family history. I came across a photo from Jacob's christening, taken just 2 months before Sienna's dramatic confession. In the picture, she was holding Jacob while surrounded by the Patterson family. She was smiling, looking every inch the devoted young mother. Looking at it now, knowing what I knew, I could see things I had missed at the time. The way her smile didn't quite reach her eyes, the way she held Jacob slightly apart from herself, as if he were a prop rather than her child. The way she was positioned to be the center of attention while still appearing modest and maternal. I had been watching her even then, I realized. Some instinct had been warning me that something was wrong, even before I could articulate what it was. I removed the photo from the album and placed it in a separate envelope. Someday, when Jacob was much older, he might want to see pictures of his mother from when he was a baby. But for now, our family albums would tell a different story. The story of the people who had chosen to love and protect him unconditionally. As I worked, I thought about the lessons this experience had taught me about family, loyalty, and the difference between love and manipulation. Sienna had been skilled at imitating love, but real love wasn't about control or personal gain. Real love was about sacrifice, protection, and putting someone else's needs before your own. Wesley had loved Sienna enough to trust her completely, even when that trust was betrayed. Malcolm had loved his family enough to face the truth about his own weaknesses and work to change them. And I had loved them both enough to spend months gathering evidence that would protect them, even though doing so meant exposing painful truths. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. The caller ID showed Sienna's number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up on the 4th ring. Adrienne? Sienna's voice was small, uncertain. What do you want, Sienna? I wanted to say that I'm sorry, for everything. I know you probably don't believe me, but I really did love Wesley. And I love Jacob. I considered my response carefully. Love isn't something you feel, Sienna. It's something you do. And what you did was try to destroy the people you claim to love for your own benefit. There was a long silence. I know I messed up everything. I was scared. I wanted to make sure Jacob would be okay. Jacob is okay, I said firmly. He's loved, he's protected, and he's growing up in a family that will always tell him the truth. That's more than you were offering him. Can I ask how he's doing? I looked toward the stairs where Jacob was sleeping peacefully in his crib, surrounded by toys and books and all the evidence of a family that treasured him. He's happy, I said simply. He's surrounded by people who love him for who he is, not for what he can do for them. Another silence. I really am sorry, Adrienne. I hope someday you can forgive me. Forgiveness isn't something you can ask for, Sienna. It's something you have to earn. And earning it starts with taking full responsibility for what you've done and making sure you never do it again. I understand. I'll see Jacob next month for the supervised visit. You will. And Sienna? He's a wonderful little boy. Don't waste the opportunity to get to know him for who he really is. After I hung up, I sat quietly for a long time, listening to the sounds of my house settling around me. Upstairs, Wesley was reading in his old bedroom. In the guest house, Malcolm was probably watching the evening news. And in the nursery, Jacob was dreaming whatever dreams babies dream. For the first time in months, maybe years, the Patterson family was exactly where it was supposed to be. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.